Videos like this are made possible by my wonderful supporters on Patreon. Check the link below if you'd like to join them, and even get access to exclusive content.
Yeah, it's rewind time.
The rewind or flashback mechanic is something that's almost entirely exclusive to the racing genre. Games like these are no stranger to assists and driving aids, and yet rewinds kind of exist in their own bubble. It's one thing to have options that make it easier to control your car or reduce the difficulty of your AI opponents, but allowing players to instantly undo their actions is very much another. Since their emergence in the late 2000s, rewinds have become a staple for many franchises. But at the same time, they've also been the subject of a fair amount of ridicule. At the end of the day, we're only human. We've all made mistakes that we wish we could undo. But to have a feature that allows you to nullify any and all errors on a whim isn't necessarily a good thing. The challenge presented by most racing games is centered on their risk versus reward balance. However, if you have the ability to rewind and try again as many times as you like, there's no longer any risk, and so it's not surprising that this feature is generally disliked by purists. But when looking from a casual perspective, what they allow you to do is save time by immediately having another attempt, rather than being forced to restart a race completely. From that point of view, there's no reason not to use them. The racing game rewinds debate is a lot more nuanced than most people realize, and in this video I want to fully dive into it. Are they ultimately a positive, or a negative, or something in between? By considering every angle, hopefully we can get a clearer picture. At the same time, I also want to present a unique perspective on this topic, one that you've probably never considered before. But first, to fully understand the discussion surrounding the rewind mechanic, we first have to understand its origins. The racing game that had the honour of debuting this feature was the 2006 PS2 classic Squadra Corse Alfa Romeo, also known as Alfa Romeo Racing Italiano in North America. For the sake of brevity, I'll just refer to it as SCAR from now on. Developed by Italian studio Milestone, who later became well known thanks to their MotoGP titles among others, it seems like a fairly run-of-the-mill budget racing game centered around a specific brand, the sort of thing that was quite common in the 2000s. However, it did have one rather unique selling point. As we can see from its box art, this game claims to be the world's first ever racing RPG. That assertion is debatable. 1997's Gran Turismo is well known for popularizing role-playing mechanics within the racing genre, and there were games even before this one which included elements like these. But Milestone's statement isn't a complete fabrication, because whilst games like Gran Turismo allow the player to upgrade their cars, as you would in the real world, in SCAR you instead upgrade your driver. As you progress through this game's Dynasty mode, you earn skill points which you can then invest into improving different driving abilities. Alongside this, you can earn pieces of gear, such as helmets, racing suits, etc., that also improve various stats. From this, it's clear to see that when they call this game a racing RPG, what they mean is that it's a racing game with RPG-style mechanics that are typical of non-car related RPGs, which I do believe had never been done before this point. As every race gives you a specific car to use, with your opponents also driving identical models, this means that the decision of where to invest your skill points is the only variable factor to your progression. There are skills which improve how the cars handle and accelerate, effectively performance upgrades but just framed differently, as well as ones that make it easier to intimidate other drivers, and also make it harder for them to intimidate you. However, for the sake of this video, the skills that we're most interested in are the ones that influence the Tiger effect. This is the game's rewind mechanic, the first of its kind. Provided you have at least 1 second of time available, as shown by the gauge in the bottom right corner, by pressing triangle, you're able to rewind time at any point during the race. There are two skills that influence the Tiger effect. Vision increases the base amount of it you're given from the start of the race, whereas Anticipation improves the rate at which it regenerates after being used. In case you're wondering, unless there's some proverb I'm not aware of, I don't see any relation between tigers and being able to manipulate time itself. Now that I think about it, it might be some sort of play on Eye of the Tiger, but I'm not sure. Whilst it's a neat idea and concept, I feel like the execution of it could have been better. When you use the tiger effect, the game only rewinds by a single second, even if you have more time available. Because of this, I found that in many cases, it didn't really help. Say you brake too late for a corner and run off the track. Well, what will most likely happen is that by the time you realise your error and hit triangle, the game won't rewind far enough back for you to rectify your mistake, and so you're screwed either way. This is less of a problem when you upgrade the tiger effect, since if you have more than 1 second remaining, you can activate it again straight away, but it's still a clunky way of doing it. Regardless, these were the humble beginnings of rewinds in racing games, and it would be left up to future titles to refine the idea further. The first to take up that challenge would be 2008's Race Driver Grid. Given Scar's relative obscurity, it's debatable whether Codemasters actually took inspiration from it, or they came up with their flashback mechanic independently. Either way, the basic idea is the same, allowing players to rewind time and thus giving them another chance. The way it's been implemented is quite a bit different though. For one, it's no longer tied to an RPG-style skill point system. Instead, it's balanced around the level of difficulty that you choose. As well as this option adjusting the speed of your AI rivals, as you would expect, it also changes the number of flashbacks you have available in any given race. On the easiest basic difficulty, you have 5 flashbacks to make use of, but as you move up the levels these decrease, until the ultimate ninja difficulty, where you have none. Once again, you're able to use flashbacks at any point during a race, but you do have more freedom with how you use them. Whereas in Scar, this process was done automatically from the point you press the button, in Grid, it's combined with an instant replay system. This allows you to pinpoint the exact moment that you want to rewind to within the past 10 seconds of gameplay. For me, this change transforms the feature from merely a fun novelty into a genuinely useful tool. Having these lifelines potentially allows you to experience the game to a greater extent. For example, if you're someone who isn't so confident in your driving abilities, knowing that you have flashbacks to use might inspire you to race harder and thus enjoy the game more. All in all, it's hard not to view Grid's version of this mechanic as a clear step up. The third different developer to have a go at a rewind mechanic was Turn 10 Studios, with 2009's Forza Motorsport 3. Whereas Scar and Grid could be considered arcade racers, Forza was a notably more serious racing game, albeit still some way off a full-on simulation. As such, its inclusion of rewinds feels like the turning point for when they became widely accepted in the industry. In this game, there are no limits to how many times you can use a rewind in any race. Upon pressing the rewind button, you're automatically sent back a few seconds, and then given the option to resume. If you want to, you can keep rewinding as far back as you wish, all the way to the start of the race. Effectively, from the moment you activate it, there are a set number of points that you can resume from. Compared to Grid, this method is more fluid and easier to use, but somewhat more restrictive. It always has a habit of rewinding not quite far enough, and then you have to press it again and wait a few more seconds before it finally drops you off. If you could just choose when to stop it manually, that would have been an improvement in my opinion. So, as we've seen, the first 3 racing game devs to include the ability to reverse time, each did so in their own unique way. From the upgradable Tiger effect in Scar, to the difficulty level scaled flashbacks in Grid, and the unlimited rewinds in FM3. But moving forward, how did each method fare? Well, for fans of Milestone's racing RPG, assuming that they exist, sadly, Scar was the only racing game to handle the feature in this way. In spite of its flaws, it was an interesting idea, and one that I do hope gets revisited eventually. Meanwhile, after Grid, Codemasters started implementing flashbacks into their other franchises. First Dirt 2 in 2009, and then F1 2010 the following year. From that point onwards, it became a staple of their racing games. However, in recent years, they've abandoned the concept of having a limited number of flashbacks dependent on the difficulty level, in favour of a Forza-esque system where should you have it enabled, you can rewind to your heart's content. And speaking of Forza, in their next game to implement this feature, Motorsport 4, you're given the ability to turn rewinds off. Doing this also has a wider impact in the sense that, without them, you get a 20% credits bonus for each race in the career, just like with other assists and difficulty options. whilst this feature has carried through into every game they've released since then, not a whole lot else has changed. The version of the rewind mechanic that you can find in their latest Motorsport and Horizon entries is functionally identical to how it was in FM3 all those years ago. Although it wasn't the first or even second racing game to implement it, for many people, Forza is the series most strongly linked to this feature, such is its ubiquity. And that's how we got to where we are now in current day. As I mentioned before, it's no secret that there's a difference of opinion surrounding rewinds within the racing game fandom. Among casual players, they're generally well regarded as a helpful assist, but more hardcore fans would be likely to say that they're unnecessary and even take away from the experience. Most online discussions surrounding the feature usually boil down to this conflict. Now, I'll be entirely transparent, I'm in the latter camp. Whenever I play a racing game that has rewinds, one of the first things I do is turn them off. For me, the challenge of a racing game is a big part of its appeal, so to give myself an unfair advantage by being able to rewind time just doesn't feel satisfying. I mean, the AI can't undo their mistakes, so why should I? I should state that this gripe mainly applies to games that allow you to rewind ad infinitum. When it comes to the older Codemasters titles, if the difficulty level I'm playing on gives me 1 or 2 flashbacks, whilst I will try to avoid using them, I'm not totally against the idea. In that case, since they're a part of the fundamental game design, I don't feel as bad for making use of them. With the unlimited approach, it's the element of self-policing that I really don't like. I mean, what's to stop me from using it at every single corner to get the absolute best results? Almost like a tool-assisted speedrun. At that point, I prefer to just not have the option at all. But in saying all this, I recognise that not everyone plays racing games for the same reason that I do. For some, the idea of challenge just isn't as important to their overall enjoyment. I don't want to come across as some elitist scumbag who looks down on people for using rewinds, because frankly, I hate that mindset. When it comes to the rewind discussion, there will always be some people who seem to think that using them is a sign of weakness, and that you shouldn't be playing racing games if you don't want to risk failing. But what people like that don't seem to consider is that there will always be situations where the shoe is on the other foot. Whilst I know that I'm generally pretty good at racing games, there are other genres that I play where I kinda suck. In those cases, I am the casual audience, with my main priority being to simply enjoy myself, not testing my ability. And when you look at it from that perspective, is it such a crime for someone to use an optional feature that makes things easier in a game that they're primarily playing just to have fun? Considering that, the whole argument is meaningless. Let people play games how they want to play them. There's also the argument that rewinds can help you to learn and improve. For example, if you're practicing a track and there's a certain corner that you're struggling with, being able to rewind and have another go straight away, instead of having to complete a full lap, is very handy. On the less serious side, rewinds can also be fun to mess around with. I have fond memories of using them to cause the biggest crashes I could in various games. So, I hope I made it clear that even though I normally don't like using rewinds, I have no problem with people who do. But, whilst the debate between whether players should or shouldn't use them is usually what dominates the narrative, for me, the bigger question is, should games include them at all? You might expect the arguments for and against to be very similar to the previous topic, but that's not quite the case. In games that offer unlimited rewinds, even though they're an optional feature that you can disable entirely, the fact that they're in the game at all often makes me feel somewhat conflicted. And for the longest while, I never fully understood why. A quick Google search will lead you to articles claiming that the rewind mechanic is the best thing to happen to racing games, and that they even save the genre entirely. But, along with making the experience smoother for casual players, are there any negative effects of having them in these games? You see, in talking about racing games with rewind mechanics, there are a number of outliers, but probably none more so than Gran Turismo. GT is arguably the biggest racing game franchise today, and yet throughout its near 3-decade existence, has never implemented a flashback or rewind feature in any of its games. Not only that, but in spite of their presence in other series, notably key rival Forza Motorsport, there's never been a strong desire from the fanbase to see one implemented. Back in 2014, the largest Gran Turismo forum on the internet, GT Planet, opened a suggestions board, where players could submit and vote on their most requested new and returning cars, tracks, and features to appear in the series. When it comes to the features, the suggestion with the most votes is for improved engine sounds, currently standing at 777 likes. As it turns out, someone also made a suggestion for rewinds. Do you want to guess how many votes it got? 9. Sure, we are talking about posts from well over a decade ago, but to be honest, I think the sentiment is still the same in current day. Whilst Gran Turismo 7 is a flawed game in many ways, its lack of a rewind mechanic is not part of that. Now, I know what some of you will be saying at this point. Gran Turismo is the real driving simulator after all, so its fanbase is probably just made up of those elitists you mentioned earlier. Well, whilst there will always be people like that, something which is emphasized due to the series' fixation on realism, that argument overlooks one very important point. Gran Turismo 7 is actually extremely popular with casual players, the exact type that rewinds and flashbacks are targeted towards. For a feature that supposedly saved the racing game genre, nobody really seems to care about it not being in one of the most popular racing game franchises. And for me, that naturally leads to an important question. Are they really necessary? Well, I believe the fact that an unlimited rewind ability improves the experience for some players says less about those players, or even the rewind mechanic itself, and more about the games which it appears in. Let me elaborate. 2014's Forza Horizon 2 is a game that I generally like, and I feel like that's important to mention because I'm going to say some not so positive stuff about it. Whilst it's obviously not the first racing game to ever have rewinds, they were very much a staple of the series by this point, it was the first Horizon game to include the cross-country event type. Now, my opinion on these cross-country races does not reflect my opinion on the game as a whole, but that said, they're pretty much always my least favourite part of any Horizon game. A couple of years ago, I was playing through Horizon 2 for the first time and had rewind switched off like I normally do. But then I encountered this one cross-country event that was giving me some major headaches. This particular race encapsulated the discipline at its absolute worst. Bizarre and unpredictable physics, confusing course design, and AI that blatantly cheats by missing checkpoints without any consequences. The works. The problem I had was that I knew I could beat it, but on every attempt I would encounter some BS that I had no way of avoiding. It was pretty frustrating. In an event that normally takes only a handful of minutes, I was stuck there for a good while just restarting it over and over again. Anyway, I did eventually manage to win the race, and it was only when all was said and done that a thought popped into my head. That would have been so much easier if I just used rewinds. And after thinking about that statement some more, I had a bit of an epiphany that explained why racing games that have unlimited rewinds always rub me the wrong way. The way we've been conditioned to look at the situation is that rewinds exist purely to help less skilled players account for the flaws in their driving. But another way to think about it that almost never gets talked about is that by implementing rewinds, the developers are also able to cover up the flaws in their games. Let's go back to one of the articles I showed earlier, in particular this one from the 6th Axis, which glazes the rewind function in Forza Motorsport 3. I'm going to read you a handful of quotes from that article, see if you notice a pattern. I instinctively reach for the back button every time I become involved in a crash that simply wasn't my fault. Current racers like Need for Speed Shift would benefit massively from the ability to correct a mistake, given that game's occasionally rather shady physics. Racing games simply don't feel fair without the ability to rewind a portion of time. These are statements that I think some of you will agree with, and in doing research for this video, I found plenty of comments echoing similar takes. What if there's a glitch that ruins my race, or the AI does something unpredictable and takes me out? These are all statements that I've heard some variation of that people use to justify having a rewind mechanic. And it's a fair point. Why would you accept your race being ruined through something totally beyond your control when there's a feature that you can use to instantly undo the damage? But remarks like these seem to gloss over the real issue. If a racing game doesn't feel fair without being able to rewind time, then the implication is that that game is inherently unfair. Going back to my FH2 example, that was the main crux of the issue. Not that the race was difficult, but that it was unfairly difficult. When compared to the AI, I was simply at a disadvantage through no fault of my own. In situations like these, many other players would just reach for the rewind button, but because I chose to disable it, I was left to see the full consequences of these problems. Now, you may be thinking that the real issue is my desire to not use rewinds, a symptom of my own stubbornness. But here's the thing. A rewind mechanic is not a solution to these problems, it merely mitigates the impact of them. At the end of the day, even if I were to use rewinds, there's no getting around the fact that the off-road physics can still be weird, and that the AI still blatantly cheats. But to the vast majority of players who do use rewinds, these issues seem far more trivial. Sure, they may still encounter them from time to time, but the ability to reverse time when things go wrong means that there is little actual detriment, and so it's very easy to overlook or forget about them entirely. And with that, we've finally gotten down to the core issue that I have with rewinds as a concept. They fundamentally change how most people perceive gameplay problems in these games without actually fixing anything. Here's a real-life analogy that anyone who lives in the UK can relate to. Imagine that you're driving down the road and suddenly hit a massive pothole which destroys your tyre. Now, let's say that you have a real-life rewind button that allows you to jump a few seconds back in time. Naturally, you would use this to avoid the pothole and be on your way as if nothing ever happened. But even so, the pothole is still there. Apply this to every driver on the road, and what you would discover is that whilst there are no fewer potholes, the amount of complaints about the road surface would reduce. So, what's the problem with that, you might say? Well, fewer complaints means that things are a lot less likely to be fixed or improved in the long term. Not that complaining about our roads actually seems to make a difference, but that's not the point. Carrying this back over to racing games, we can see how this phenomenon affects them in current day. Picture this, you're doing a single player race in Forza Horizon 5 and you miss a checkpoint. We've all been there. From here you have two options. Either rewind back to before the checkpoint and try again, provided you have them enabled, or let the game reset you automatically. If you decide to respawn, you have to endure a 5-second countdown before getting reset to the previous checkpoint at a standstill. Given that most races in this game last no longer than 3 minutes, you almost certainly won't have enough time to recover the lost ground, meaning that a full restart is the most likely result. When looking at this situation as a whole, doesn't that seem bizarre? So, you miss a checkpoint by a few centimeters, and the two possible outcomes are you either instantly undo your error with 0 consequences, or you have your entire race destroyed. Sure, in the latter case, because the races are so short, restarting isn't a massive sacrifice. But my point is that there must be a better solution than this all-or-nothing approach. For instance, they could improve the reset system by allowing you to do it manually once you see the countdown, and giving you a rolling start when you respawn. Or even better, implement a slowdown penalty mechanic like we see in many other racing games. By doing either of these, you'd be able to have a situation where missing a checkpoint is still punished, without it being a catastrophic race ender. These improvements took me literally seconds to come up with. So the fact that we've come this far in the series without anything being done is kind of baffling. Until you consider the fact that in situations like these, most of the player base has been conditioned to just hit the rewind button and not think about it any deeper. In this case, the terrible respawn system is the pothole that never gets fixed. Because hardly anyone experiences the full consequences of it, nobody complains about it and nothing improves. It's a perfect case study for my theory that the reliance on rewind mechanics in racing games is in some ways actually making them worse, or at the very least, slowing down their rate of improvement. Throughout the many online discussions I've read surrounding rewind features in racing games, this is an argument that I've never seen anyone bring up. When it comes down to it, unlimited rewinds in racing games are a crutch not just for the players, but more importantly, the people who make the games. In an ideal racing game, one that you can customize how you want with different driving assists and difficulty options, you would simply never need a rewind button. But the games which have them are far from ideal. By including rewinds, the less polished aspects of the gameplay get covered up, and it's possible that developers are aware of this. One interesting detail is that in more recent Forza games, they no longer give you a credits bonus for doing races without rewinds. This means that there is no incentive to ever turn them off. when combined with the fact that they're on by default, and that you always get reminded to use them, to me it almost seems like the game is trying to imply that this is the correct way to play. But if it's just supposed to be a simple accessibility option, in a similar vein to driving assists, why would they do all of this? Well, when you consider how rewinds have the effect of drastically reducing the impact of things that players could deem as unfair, without the developers having to actually improve anything, then they have a pretty clear motive for wanting players to keep them on. Now consider Codemasters and the difficulty scale flashbacks they pioneered with Grid. As I stated before, I think that this was a great approach that strikes an excellent balance, and yet they abandoned it for a basic unlimited option much like Forza's. Again, some may try to paint this as them improving accessibility, but was anyone actually asking for this change? I think the old method was pretty well received. But the impact of them doing this is that when you're playing an F1 game and the AI inevitably do something really stupid and wreck your race, you can just pretend like it didn't happen. No need for them to make the CPUs more intelligent and thus improve the overall experience. No, that takes way too much effort. Yeah, accessibility may be part of it, but it's not the full story. All of this explains why I instantly have more respect towards racing games that don't allow unlimited rewinds. Because if a game is designed properly, there's simply no reason for this to be a feature. Once again, Gran Turismo is the ultimate counterpoint. It doesn't need rewinds because the on-track side is so well polished that you rarely encounter these sorts of situations. And in the cases where the game does present some unfair BS, such as single-player races where the leader starts 10 light years ahead of you and you've only got a few laps to catch them, nobody jumps to saying, "Man, I wish this game had rewinds to make things easier." They instead go, "Man, I wish they didn't design the game like this because it's kinda BS." Without complaints like these, it's possible that we never would have gotten the excellent Power Pack DLC for GT7, because that was made in direct response to many people's gripes with the single-player racing. When you don't train your players to rely on rewinds to solve every inconvenience, they no longer become blind to the underlying issues. And if that's possible for the ultra-accessible Gran Turismo, why is it not possible for everyone else? Frankly, if your racing game is not accessible without rewinds, then something is wrong with your game. So, what's the solution here? Well, I fear that at this point, there kind of isn't one. Rewind culture, as I call it, is so firmly entrenched in the modern racing game scene that it's difficult to see much really changing. Whilst it would be easy for me to just say, stop using rewinds because they're actually making these games worse, that ignores the reality of the situation. As I said before, people play these games primarily to have fun, and how they want to do that is entirely up to them. After all, I have just spent quite some time explaining how not using rewinds can make these games more frustrating, so to expect people to turn them off after hearing all of that would be pretty foolish. But at the same time, I still strongly believe that if every player were to unanimously decide to turn rewinds off, many issues and possible improvements would get highlighted far quicker. And provided that developers are receptive to this feedback, that would only be a positive for the genre as a whole. For me, the ideal situation would be for every franchise that has unlimited flashbacks to get to a point where players realize that they don't really need them. Gran Turismo status, you could say. However, even if these unfair aspects were to be improved, it's unlikely that this'll ever happen. I mean, can you really see Forza deciding to ditch rewinds? They just seem too strongly linked with the series' identity at this point to ever consider that being a possibility. I suppose at the very least, we could hope for it to be overhauled. After all, their current rewind system is virtually unchanged since FM3. Seriously, just give us the ability to resume whenever we want to. Codemasters worked this out in 2008. If you're watching this video on the week of upload, then we are just days away from the release of Forza Horizon 6. This is the most highly anticipated racing game for quite some time, and many people have very high expectations for it. Whilst there are a lot of things to look forward to, being a Forza game, there are certain things that I know aren't going to change. And without a different approach, they probably never will. Very soon, we will be bombarded with content about this game. Now, whilst I think it's naive to expect the average player to turn off rewinds after watching this video, maybe I can get that message through to the players who hold the greatest influence. If you are a game reviewer, fellow content creator, or just anyone whose opinions on racing games have an impact on what other people think, try turning rewinds off when you play Forza Horizon 6. As I hope I made very clear, no longer having that safety net when things go wrong allows you to have a much firmer grasp on the real issues. Sure, it will be more frustrating when you make a mistake, but there will also be situations where you get screwed over through no fault of your own. And it's in cases like these where, rather than just hitting rewind and forgetting that it ever happened, you'll be able to determine if there's something that the game could have done better, and thus provide feedback that may lead to improvements down the line. Basically, if you're trying to give an honest assessment of a racing game, using rewinds will always cloud your perception to some degree. The unlimited rewind mechanic is not a crucial game design element, and so by removing it, you don't really lose anything. At the end of the day, all we want is for these games to be as good as they can be, and I believe that by ignoring rewinds, that will help them to improve, even if it's only in minor ways. What originally started off as an interesting novelty has grown into something with a completely different purpose. Whilst its current incarnation is often called an accessibility option, as I've shown, there's a lot more to it than that. Whether you use them or not, I think we can all agree that a game in which you don't feel the urge to hit the rewind button every 5 seconds is a far more enjoyable experience than one in which you do.